Your lesson for today is lesson 13. We're going to be converting between fractions and decimals, and we're going to do that by using equivalent fractions today. Your objective today, I will demonstrate my mathematical ability to distinguish whether the context of a real-life situation determines a rational number be represented as a fraction or decimal through class discussion. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, let's first look at some different examples. What are some, as we're looking at like real-life situations, when do we see decimals? Well, I know I always see decimals when I'm working with money. Okay. I also know I always use decimals kind of when I'm talking about the metric system a lot. Okay. And we've talked about that before, right? Okay. What about fractions? When are some times we use fractions? Well, you know, my dad does carpentry. He builds things, and he always uses fractions during carpentry with measurements. And then my mom likes to cook, and she always tells me that fractions are a big part of cooking, so because they're going to be in recipes. Okay, so these are just some examples of when we look at fractions. Now think about this for a minute. Have you ever seen a recipe that calls for 2.7 cups of flour? I've never heard of that. But why do you think that is? Well, when we are cooking, we're dealing with fractions. So it would be like 1/3 or 1/4 or 1/2 of a cup. Okay, because we're talking about fractional cups. Okay, so you know, my car's getting low on gas. I'm going to go to the gas station. Am I going to find on the board that tells me how much my gas is? That's going to be $3 3.37 per gallon. No, because we're talking about money there. And with money, we're talking about decimals. Okay? So, we use decimals and fractions in real life, but it depends on the situation in which we're going to be using what we're going to be doing. One thing we need to be looking at before we get too much involved with today's lesson is we need to talk about what decimals are. Well, first, you know, just something I'm always interested in like where things come from. Well, the word decimal itself, it comes from the Latin word decimus, which means 1/10. Okay? Now let's think about things that are divided into 1/10. If I take a pie and I divide it into 10 slices, each one of those slices is 1/10, right? Now think about this for a minute. A dime. A dime is worth 10 cents, which is also 1/10 of a dollar. That's why you need 10 dimes to equal a dollar. Okay? Decimals are simply points on a number line. Okay? They're points on a number line. How well I can spell. When I start dividing things into tenths. Okay? And I could divide it smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, meaning of a decimal to relate decimal places. Well, if I start with my decimal point, okay, remember the number over here is my ones place, right? So let's go this way. This very first spot is going to be my tenths. Remember with decimals, we always have that TH on the end of things. So it's not a ones, because is a 1 part of a tenth? No, it's not. So this very first spot here is a tenth. Then we go, what's next? To the hundredths. Okay. The thousandths. The 10,000ths, the 100,000ths, and we could be going on and on and on with how we are going to be putting our decimal places. Well, I want you to understand that these are all in powers of 10. I'm increasing by 10. This is my tenths, my hundredths, my thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s. Okay? So decimals are all in relationship to tenths and the powers of the 10. Alright? Now, let's see how that works with some of the problems that we have. Here I want you to use place value to write terminating decimals as equivalent fractions. Well, first off, you need to remember, or we need to talk about the word terminating. Terminating means to stop. I think of the word, when I hear the word terminate, I think of a stop sign. Okay? Because my decimals will have a stopping point. If I look here, my decimal 0.25, it has a stopping point. It does not go on and on. It does not repeat. It does not go forever. Well, let's write this as a fraction. I'm going to look at my decimal that is all the way to the right. So in this instance, I'm going to look at the 5. Okay? I need to think about what we talked about on the last slide and figure out where or what spot this 5 is in. This 5 is in the hundredths spot. So I'm going to simply write it's 2 and 25 over 100. I put over 100 because the 5 is in the hundredth spot. Now I need to reduce this. Okay, well, I know I can reduce it by 5 because my last number here is 5 and a 0. I know that 5 goes in both 10 and 5. I also know that this is 25 over 100. I think in terms of dollars and cents a little bit sometimes. And I know that there's 4 quarters and $1. So I know that this is going to be 2 and 1/4. Okay? Because I divided it, both the top and the bottom, by 25. Okay? And I got 1/4 as my answer. Now let's look at this other one. This other one is not necessarily so easy, but let's look. I start at the number that's all the way to the right. Okay, I look at my 8. I know that my 8, this is my tens, my hundreds, my thousands, so I'm going to put 218 over 1,000. Now I'm going to try to reduce it. Well, I know that, I know that the even rule works almost all the time. And that is, if both numbers are even, I can divide them by 2. So let's try that first. And divide the top of my numerator and my denominator by 2. 218 divided by 2 is going to be 109. And 1,000 divided by 2 is going to be 500. Now I'm going to look at this again. Can I reduce it even further? Well, I have a 9 and I have a 0. Well, they're not even, so I can't divide them by 2. When I add these together, I don't get a number divisible by 3. So my answer is left as 109 divided by 500. So this is how I would use, how I take my decimal and make equivalent fractions. Equal fractions. Okay, remember I look at the decimal place to the very right. I put that whole number over that, so that's where I got 218 over 1,000. And then I reduce it like we know how to reduce. And once I have the simplest form, I'm not going any further. Same goes if I have a mixed number as well. Here we're talking about converting fractions to decimals. Well, I know that I need it in a tens, some sort of a power of a 10. Well, I need to look. Can I make 20? Can I convert it to a power of 10? Well, I can't convert it to 10, but can I convert it to 100? Yes, I can. 20 times what? 20 times 5 gets me to 100. Whatever I do to the bottom, I must do to the top. So 3 times 5 is 15. Now I have 15 over 100, and I could write that as 0.15 or 15 hundredths, because my 5 is in the 100 spot because I have 15 over 100. Okay, that was pretty easy, correct? Well, let's look at another one. Doing the same thing, I know that I have quarters in a dollar. I have 4 quarters in $1. And whenever I do the bottom, I must do to the top. So I have 40 over 100. Okay. Which that equals 40 hundredths, or I could say it's 4/10. Because when I talk about decimals, I'm talking about the last number with not a zero and what place it is. So I could say that 40 hundredths is the same as 4/10, and that's how I write my decimal. Okay, this only works if I have factors of 2 and 5 of 100. Okay, I can multiply by 2, I can multiply by 5, but so not all numbers am I going to do this. For example, 3, if I have 1/3, I can't do it that way. Okay, that's a different animal, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, not in this lesson, but don't worry about it. I'm just kind of pre-loading you guys where we're going to be going. Don't worry about it in this lesson, though, okay? So that pretty much ends our lesson. So you need to make sure that all this is in your notes. It should be fairly easy. I believe this lesson is kind of pretty straightforward. Now, make sure you write your WSQ and you bring your question to class.